as I was helping all of these people who wanted their own startups, I also started to advocate for a new visa category. And it all led to having very deep experience in how startups need help from the legal profession to make sure that they are legally able to work on their startups in the United States and get from idea stage all the way to exit.
Hello, 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 and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. I hope you are doing wonderfully well as I am. I have had such a good time in the last few weeks preparing for this call in particular. Now, on today's show, I have the pleasure of welcoming nationally recognized immigration expert on startups and entrepreneurship, immigration lawyer, and founder of Watson Immigration Law, Tahmina Watson. Welcome to the show, Tahmina.
Thank you so much, Rick. I'm so grateful to be here.
Absolute pleasure to have you here. Now, you and I are going to be talking about how immigrants drive the startup ecosystem, and we'll also take a deep dive into both of your books, The Startup Visa and the US Immigration Visa Guides for Startups and Founders. Geez, that's a mouthful.
Sorry about that.
No, absolutely love those titles. Fantastic. So, are you calling in from Seattle?
I am calling in from Seattle. Yes.
Fantastic. Tell me a little bit about the place. Have you lived there long, or is that home forever?
You
Or?
know, Seattle is a little piece of heaven on earth. It is absolutely stunning and gorgeous. I have not had the pleasure of visiting Sydney yet, but I was born and raised in London.
Oh,
And London is also a beautiful city, particularly in the sun. And, there was a song by Lily Allen who, really depicted London in the best light in her song. And I forget the words at the moment, but it was like, people having sandwiches in the parks and so forth. Seattle doesn't necessarily have the same London vibe, but it has the London weather, which is, gray away from gray for the most part. But when it is sunny, it is absolutely gorgeous. And we have mountains here, lakes here. We're obviously a coastal state. It is just absolutely beautiful.
So, away from your work time, do you have much time to spend on like for yourself? And if you do, what do you like to do?
COVID actually, maybe your listeners might resonate with this.
Mm.
COVID allowed me time to think about, what matters in life. And it was just by chance that I took note of some birds in my backyard.
Ah,
And it sort of led from one thing to another. And now I'm a bird photographer,
I love
a
it.
bird and wildlife photographer. And I have to say, I am waiting to come to Australia so I can see all of the beautiful birds and wildlife that you have there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, again, the door is always open. We have some magnificent species of different types of bird. My favorite's the Rosella. Now, I have to ask you, I have a fairly nice mobile phone. It's one of the latest ones, and I can take some really incredible photos on that alone. So I'm wondering, what sort of equipment do you use to photograph birds?
I really love this question because I'm a complete technophobe. I don't like change. I don't like all the modernization of stuff because I get used to something and I
Yeah.
just want to stay there. But with these bird pictures, the mobile phone wasn't doing it enough for me. I needed to see more details and more sharpness. And I upgraded my camera from just using the phone to a mirrorless camera. I used a few in between. And so now I have something called a Canon R6 version 2.
Very
And I
nice.
also have a lens that is 600 millimeters, which is a pretty long lens.
Yeah.
And I also have an extension to it. So I get, not 144 magnification, a little bit more than that.
Mhm.
And so I can get pretty close to birds, even if I'm standing quite far away.
Yep.
But the trouble is the camera can be pretty heavy. And, it's been transformative because to carry the camera, I've had to do weight training.
Well, there you go. There's another side benefit. Get yourself a tripod and get the muscles working in the arms. Now, there's such an art to it, isn't there? The ISO settings and shutter speeds and all that sort of stuff. It just blows my mind. Did it take you long to learn?
It took me a long time. I was pretty scared about touching any of the buttons. touch the buttons. I don't know how to get back to autofocus. But I slowly learned, and there are a lot of YouTube channels that have been, good friends for me in this education. But I've learned by going out and, hanging out with people who know more than me. I've taken one or two actual in-person classes. But anybody listening, I mean, you can go to school forever and ever, but unless you practice, you'll never actually know that skill. And so I have to tell you, I don't know how many thousands and thousands of hours I've just practiced at this point. I am so passionate about, photography and just going out and being in nature any spare minute I have, that, I think it's a Malcolm Gladwell who talks about 10,000 hours.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how many thousands of hours I've done, but I've done a lot.
It's been a lot.
And it's been so fantastic. I can now sort of, I have a Facebook page in which I call myself the birding immigration lawyer. And on that page, people can see the progression of my birds. And it's interesting, when I look back, the pictures were not necessarily great, but I think my enthusiasm was just off the chart.
I absolutely love it. We actually, my son, I have my 9-year-old son. He has a love for birds as well. So much so, we went out and bought a bird bath, and now he can feed wild birds off of our balcony, which is overlooking sort of hills and lots of wildlife. And they come to him and they sit on his arm, sit on his leg, and they'll feed from him. It's incredible. I wonder.
You have to send me some pictures.
Oh, look, yeah, if you went to our TikTok, you'll be able to find us there, absolutely, and you'll see him there. But also, I wondered, do you have a favorite type of bird?
I do actually.
Yeah.
I didn't when I started, but I really love pelicans. I just never would have realized that the ancient looking face that it has, the large body it has, all of that, together with the elegance it has, it's a really majestic bird. So at this point, I really, really love pelicans. I particularly love brown pelicans, but I cannot wait to see the Australian pelicans. I'm on a gazillion different Facebook pages, and people who travel, to see birds will often post pictures. And just last week, there was somebody who posted Australian pelicans, and I was like, cannot wait to see them.
Yes.
So yes, I do have a favorite bird.
Well, look, the Goolwa outlet where they congregate seasonally and migrate to is fantastic. We often see them spinning in the sky miles above, just circling, and you know that it's them because nothing can look so majestic and so large that high up. But look, thank you so very much for sharing a little bit about your insights. Now, beyond all of that, what else do you like to do? Do you socialize? Are you a foodie? Tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
Oh, yes. I have two children. They are 14 and 12, two beautiful girls. They keep me busy to some extent. I don't have a lot of time to hang out these days. I'm in that middle part of life where everything feels chaotic.
Oh, yeah.
But, within that, I write a lot. I meditate. I try to exercise. It's one of those fantasies that, is in the back of my mind that I should do more.
Oh, the camera's enough.
I do a lot of community work.
Yeah.
I was the president of a bar association locally, which, felt like a second job. We live in a time where there's just so much uncertainty, no matter where you live on the globe. You could be wherever, and there are things that we all can do to make our surroundings better, which in turn make the world better. And so, whatever comes to mind, I'm always, taking action. But as a lawyer, I have a specific skill that I like to use. So I, do a lot of pro bono work in the community. And my friends, they're from all parts of, industry, from all parts of the community. It's somebody asked me not so long ago, which part of the community are you in? And I'm like, all of it. I get invited to the Latino month, annual fiesta parade. I get invited to the South Asian, events. I'm a Brit, so I get invited to the coronation party. I
take your
my
pick.
children. Yeah, take your pick. And I just love it. I'm so grateful for the
Yes.
community that I live in, the people around me, the love I have surrounding me. I'm just very, very blessed.
And I love this part of the call because I personally get to connect with wonderful people like you because, the show has so many diverse people from many different backgrounds. And, as a father, I wonder, I think in myself, what do I see in my children? Am I, reflective of them growing up? I wonder, what do you see in your own kids that, you can think about when you were growing up? Do you have any commonalities there?
I was born in London and then I
Mm,
lived in Bangladesh for 10 years, came back to London and then moved to the US when I got married. I've seen a lot of ups and downs in life, and I didn't have all the opportunities that my children have.
yeah.
And when I had opportunities come my way, I always grabbed them with two hands. I see that my children don't always appreciate the opportunities that are in front of them because
Mm,
it's just there.
yeah.
Um, so it's something that I want to instill in them that, do everything, say yes to everything.
Yeah.
The work that happens is that it doesn't work out. But, I have two children and I don't know about you, but they're very different from each other.
Oh, yes.
One of them is so conscientious. She's planning out the next 3 years, and I love that about her. Um, she got into a very prestigious summer program this particular summer, and she
Very
did it
good.
all on her own.
Very
But the
good.
little one, very different, yet she's a morning person. And in my house, I'm normally the morning person, waking up at 5 a.m. and meditating and writing and birding and then working.
Yep.
And she, over the summer, developed a morning routine where she wakes up at 5 a.m. only so she could go and walk with her friend at 6 a.m.
Oh, I love it.
And I know she's only 12. And,
Yeah, wow.
I was like, oh my gosh, I love this about her because, yes, now it is walking with her friend. That's the thing that makes her excited. But with that habit of waking up early, there's so much that can happen in the future.
Oh,
She said
yes.
recently on a car ride, her dad was asking something about why she was waking up so early or something about something. And she said, I just don't like to lose time in the morning.
Oh,
And
what a fantastic attitude.
I
That's
was like,
incredible.
yeah, I was jumping up and down, or, because I was thinking at 12, if she can develop this habit, and a lot of adults in their later life are looking for the 5 a.m. club,
Mm.
maybe this could be a part of her life that she doesn't have to newly
Don't
install
have to
in
worry
the
about it.
30s and 40s.
They sound like they're going to be incredible young women, and they're a real credit to you. Now, I wonder, in terms of your chosen path, now, how was it that you came to get into immigration law of all things? How did this all come about for you?
It's a funny story, actually, because I really didn't want to practice immigration law. I wanted to be a lawyer.
Right.
Since the first memories I have, I wanted to be a lawyer. And Rick, you might relate to this. You have barristers in Australia,
We
right?
do.
And you have solicitors in Australia.
Hmm.
And in the UK, obviously that's where it all started. We have solicitors and barristers. And all I wanted to do in life was be a barrister. And fast forward the clock, I finally become a barrister, but then I fall in love with this Yank. And I have to move
Imagine
to
that.
America. Um, and it wasn't an easy journey because suddenly I'm an immigrant. I was
Ah,
born in the UK. I lived in the UK. I lived in Bangladesh for a while, but my parents were Bangladeshi. And so I never had to deal with immigration. But suddenly I have to deal with immigration and sort of really feel like I'm out of, fish out of water. I don't know what to do. So we both, he's a lawyer too. And we both looked at the website, the immigration website, couldn't figure it out. So we hired a lawyer. And the lawyer helped me get my green card. So permanent residency in the United States is, referred to as green card
yes.
colloquially. And I finally got my green card, but I also had to pass the law exams again, the bar exams.
Hmm.
So that's the story for another time. It was very difficult to figure out how to
Very
be a lawyer, but
arduous.
I figured it out. I got my license. So my license and my green card sort of came along at the same time. and I had to figure out what to do. But Rick, you probably know this or see this with people in your industry, in your country,
Mm-hmm.
and all the people you speak with. It's, terminology can be different. You might be speaking the same language, but it might be something completely different when you
Mm-hmm.
utter that sentence.
All the time.
And so my resume read secretary, lawyer,
Oh,
except I was a paralegal, throughout law school,
yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily come across that way. And add that to, different schools. It was a challenge getting through to people to explain who I am, where I came from, and what I can do for them. And immigration kept following me. And I was like, no, thank you. No, thank you. My father was an immigration barrister in the UK. And in those days, in the 70s, when he became a lawyer, immigration was the community practice. A lot of people from different countries would come along. And in the 60s and 70s, there was a very high immigration policy in the UK. So he did very well at that time. But when I was growing up and figuring out what to do, I saw a lot of asylum. So
Right.
to me, immigration was synonymous with asylum. I didn't know it could be more than that. So every time an immigration job would come my way in the United States, I
Mm-hmm.
would say, no, thank you, no, thank you. And it happened like maybe 5 times. And it was the 5th time that I said, oh,
Why not?
I give in. Universe, I just give in. You have a plan.
You win.
And when I did that, I have to tell you, I haven't looked back. So that was
Fantastic.
2006,
What
and
a
here I am.
story. That's incredible. I often think about the, I guess that first moment in time when you realize, that pinnacle moment in time where you just have to change direction. When did you know that it was right for you? I mean, was it after the first case, or was it that moment that we just talked about?
That's such a great question. Um, It happened the next day, actually, I think.
Ah,
Because the first day I was like, this is a good pathway for the moment. And I thought I would do it only for 5 years, because 5 years later, I knew I would have different options. For those listeners who don't know, the United States is a federal system, sort of like you guys have.
mm,
And each state has its own laws. So you have to be licensed in that law, in that state. And with immigration, because it's federal, it can be applied to all the states. So that's why it was a good choice at the time. But I thought I had to do different things. And 5 years later, at that time, I could have waived in, meaning I wouldn't have to do an exam, and become a Washington state lawyer. But day one of actually working on some cases, what was so interesting is that I realized everything I wanted to do with law could be accomplished with US immigration law. It
ah,
is complicated. It is fast moving. It is touching people's lives intricately, whether it's their loved ones or their livelihoods. Those are the two things you're dealing with all the
all
time.
the time.
And I can make a tangible difference in people's lives for generations to come. And that realization happened. That generations to come realization came slowly. But the fact that all the things I wanted to practice could be accomplished with immigration law, where I would not have to touch a single asylum case, is when I realized I have landed in the thing I'm supposed to do.
Fantastic feedback. Thank you so very much. Now, we could take a deep dive in all the different types of immigration in terms of, where people are coming from. I often hear stories, flying in on planes is no different than coming in through a border on foot. I'd love to explore that in a moment, but you touched on something that is close to my own heart, which was community work. Can you share a little bit about that before we take a deeper dive into immigration?
Yeah, I know there are a lot of discussions in Australia about immigration, and you've had some changes in recent times.
Mm,
Um, the US immigration system is very complicated and actually pretty archaic, because it was set in the 1950s and 60s, and the 1990s had its last reform. And what we have, if you and your listeners can just visualize three buckets. We have the humanitarian bucket, we have the family bucket, and we have the business bucket. And for future business people, the business bucket is the bucket that you want to think about. But community work often could cross all three buckets. But in general, it would cross the third humanitarian bucket. So what does that mean? It really means that in the humanitarian bucket, often there are people who are coming to the United States who either are coming from war-torn countries or countries that have seen devastation in one way or another, or people who have crossed the border and they're figuring out what to do with themselves. They're coming here for asylum, to flee persecution, and basically to protect their lives and their loved ones.
Of course.
And that often can have one thing, I don't know if Australia has this. If you have legal aid in Australia
We do.
for immigration, do you have it for immigration?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Okay.
We
In the US, we don't.
No, well, look, with this is the thing. They are very different, but I think the intent worldwide is very much the same. And this line of work, it cannot be understated how important this is, that you fight the fight for people who would have otherwise not have a voice. And I know that you are so deeply involved with all of these things, including your community work, which we're touching on now. But you've also been recognized as a woman of influence. Tell us what that's about.
Oh, I'm so honored that my community actually recognized my work. So we have in the United States, next to the Wall Street Business Journal, the Wall Street Journal, every state has something called a business journal. It's, in their area, and it's basically the Wall Street Journal of that location. And we have something called the Puget Sound Business Journal. This is where I live in Seattle. This is where the sound is, the Puget Sound that meets the ocean.
Yep.
And so that's the business journal. And every year they will have people nominate, women who have made a contribution to their communities. And I was very, very, very honored and grateful that my community recognized me, nominated me, and I was selected out of I don't know how many people.
That's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I can tell you're very humble. When you have this mission, and stemming from your father's background, it seems to me that the stars truly did align for you, and it's just a wonderful story, and I appreciate you sharing. Now, tell us about your work with the Washington Immigrant Defense Network. What's all that about?
That happened as part of the community work, an extension of it.
Right.
So basically, you and probably most of the world knows that we had a president who really had some adverse immigration policies, and those policies affected how people were treated, not just at the border, but also inland. And it meant that a lot of people were being detained. And as we just spoke, we don't have legal aid in the United States for immigration. And in the early days of that presidency, immigration lawyers were donating a lot of time. We have a sense of idealism as a collective. And because we know that the work we do saves lives, immigration lawyers generally cannot just hold back. They just head in first and they just help. But what happened was the extent of the help that was necessary was absolutely overwhelming. And immigration lawyers in the United States, for the most part, have small to medium-sized businesses. More often than not, they're solo practitioners. And as a business person, Rick, you know that you've got to keep the lights on.
Yeah,
and you keep doing pro bono work, you're not going to be able to pay the bills to keep the lights on.
Correct.
And so the Washington Immigrant Defense Network came as a result of seeing what was happening in the community, where the community people needed help in the courtroom, but the lawyers were unable to provide pro bono help any further in those legal areas without some compensation. So we created a nonprofit, me and my co-founders, And it was really to give a small stipend to immigration lawyers, train non-immigration lawyers so they could be well versed in the basics of immigration law,
Mhm.
and then help those who didn't have a voice.
There's, this is a worldwide audience on the My Future Business Show. There's going to be a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds listening into this call. So very exciting news that they've been able to connect with you, Tahmina. And it's if you're looking to connect with Tahmina, we will be providing the information for you to do that at the end of the show. Now, let's talk a little bit about your expertise on startups and entrepreneurship. I know that you were awarded top immigration attorney for startups. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Oh, it's just like I said, I'm so grateful. I think as a young person, we often get distracted with ambition and achievement and just restlessness to get there. And looking back, I obviously had that too. But I'm so grateful I just followed the breadcrumbs that led from one thing to another to another. So when I moved here, and I mentioned earlier that my law license and my green card came around about the same time, and I started my own practice about 2 years after that. I had a partnership that, I learned how not to be partners with people. Um, and 2009, I opened my doors. Now,
Yeah.
if you can remember 2008 and 9, it was the height of the recession.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a global recession. And I live in Seattle, where you have Microsoft and Amazon and Boeing and all these different companies that have had headquarters here. And they were laying people off. Now, if you're an immigrant in the United States with a work visa and you don't have work, you're immediately out of status. You're essentially illegal. And so I was helping a lot of those people. And what was apparent from the majority of these people is that the American dream was something that most people aspired to. Come here, create a job, your own business,
Mhm.
and, have all of your achievements through that entrepreneurship dream, and hence the American dream. And I started to help these people with their business visas, but I also realized that there was a huge gap in our legal system that did not recognize the modern way of doing business. That the modern way of doing business, as you might know from all of your guests and all of the things that you talk about, is that you take money from other people, investors, angel investors, crowdfunding, you name it. You are creating a business, but you are putting your sweat equity, your ideas, and hard work in creating a product or service that becomes Zoom or becomes WhatsApp or it becomes Instagram. You're doing these things, but from a US immigration perspective, that business model is not necessarily immediately recognized. It recognizes the way businesses were done in the 1990s, where you put in your own capital and you do the work, but the startup ecosystem, the startup world is not recognized. So I started to advocate for legal change. And what's really interesting, Rick, is I don't think necessarily all of us go to law school with a notion that we can be a change maker. I think a lot of us who go to law school, any lawyers listening here would probably confirm, is that you either are going to change lives and impact lives, you're going to make a difference in how you try cases. But I don't know if we necessarily think about the bigger picture. We think about individual help. And I think I had a moment of an epiphany where I thought, I can change the law. So as I was helping all of these people who wanted their own startups, I also started to advocate for a new visa category. And over the years, it's been, since 2009, 2008, I was persistent and consistent and vocal. And it all led to having very deep experience in how startups need help from the legal profession, not just immigration lawyers, but others, but to make sure that they are legally able to work on their startups in the United States and get from idea stage all the way to exit. And all of that, I'm so grateful, has been recognized by Business Insider, which is one of the top, publications in the United States. And that's a summary of how that happened.
Yes, wow, that's an incredible story. I mean, the fact that, I've always said, as somebody who has a background with a lot of, business procedures and policy making and all this sort of thing from a government level down, I've always said to myself that laws are written by man, woman, whatever, and they're made to be adjusted and improved. And this is the advocacy that you've just shared with us. And again, it's a real credit to you that you've been able to, I guess, bring them up to speed, as it were, to reflect, common day practices, or current day practices, should I say. Now, you give talks about immigration law. Tell us a little bit about that.
Immigration law really, really is about loved ones or livelihoods.
Yeah.
And so when I had those three buckets I mentioned, there was the family bucket and the employment bucket. And the family is when you're reuniting or uniting loved ones. That's when you're helping spouses get together, fiancés, parents, children. And, when the travel ban happened, we had the Muslim travel ban, if you might remember. It was an incredible time to see how love can really prevail adversity. And I've had a number of very complicated cases where I had to be persistent and, strong for my clients, but the clients' love helped fuel my advocacy for them.
Hmm.
And so during the Muslim travel ban, we had a lot of those situations, but the COVID travel ban was no walk in the park
Walk in the park.
either.
No.
We had people who were stuck in different parts of the world who couldn't get back. And, when they left the country, the world was in one spot and then they got stuck wherever they were. It's almost like imagining the world, on a map, on a flat map. And then suddenly there are walls that erected overnight everywhere.
It's crazy.
Everybody got stuck where they were.
Oh, yeah.
But those who were in the middle of their immigration procedures really had to navigate how to get out of those blockages, because the cases, they didn't all care about the walls that went up, and some cases got closed or denied, and navigating that was not easy. So for immigration, from when it comes to family, to me, it's about love. It really is about love prevailing day in and day out. Now, when it comes to business, it's love for your business. I'm a big proponent of love. I've written so much about it in different contexts, but I really think the universal love really just keeps us going, no matter what your purpose is, what your industry is, what your mission in life is, whether you know it or not. So from a business immigration perspective, it's if you're a startup founder, you really believe in this thing that you want to create or fix, and you are fixated on the solution. And immigration is a big obstacle in that. So my job is to make sure that no matter how complicated their situation is, to figure out how I get them into this country so they can fulfill their mission. Because if they can fulfill their loving mission, everybody benefits. So if that's a founder, that's what they're doing. But if you were starting a business, Rick, in the United States, and you needed to hire people, your business would not be successful unless you had a team full of people who are competent to run the things that they needed to do for you. And that's where immigration comes in. So immigration to me is synonymous with love, synonymous with the economy, synonymous with jobs, synonymous with the world actually going around. And I don't know if everybody sees it that way, but for me, it's just such an important visual to be able to leave people with, so they understand immigration should not be an emotionally charged word.
I can't help but think to myself, Tamina, how much of a visionary, you look towards the future, and it's a really good, hand in glove fit for this show, because we're always talking about what we can do to improve our lives, our businesses. And again, I'm just absolutely loving this call. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about, from a credibility perspective, You've been on some pretty significant media outlets. Now, just for context for everybody who's listening to me now, tell us a little bit about how it was that you came to be featured in New York Times, Bloomberg, Forbes, NPR, CNN, and so many others. And how exciting must that have been for you?
I'm so blessed and lucky. I think I try to sometimes think about the trajectory, and I think it comes down to love again. When you have a client that really is suffering and really needs a solution, and the law itself is not bringing the solution, you need to make noise. And often the people that I'm helping are vulnerable people who do not want to use their voice because they are afraid. And I have to step up and be their voices. And being their voices over and over again has given me the opportunity, some incredible opportunities, to share the stories and suggest changes
Mm,
that will benefit not just that one particular individual, but many people who would benefit from that voice being vocalized as well as being heard by the media. But really the media is a means to an end. It's
mm.
really making sure that the powers that be, the people who are changing the laws, have the ability to make policy. They need to hear it. So really it's about making sure there is a vehicle to getting to those ears that need to hear you. And that's how it really happened. Just loving my clients, knowing that I have the ability to articulate what they need, coupled with the deep knowledge of the law, to say, this is the problem, this is the solution, this is how you can do it.
Tell you what, you're definitely a shining light in a sometimes very dark world, and it's a real credit to you with the work that you're doing. And now I'd love to talk a little bit about your books. Let's start with the Startup Visa: Key to Job Growth and Economic Prosperity in America. Now, why was it that you decided to pick up the pen and start writing? It's a big
Yeah.
journey.
You know, don't let me forget to talk about a visa that's specifically for Australians.
Let's
I
talk
want
about
to,
that now. How about we do that now, and then we can shift into the book? How about
yes,
that?
and this is a funny story from when I first started practicing. When you're a young, naive person, you sometimes think that you can project knowledge, but if you don't have the knowledge,
You don't have it.
you don't have it. So, I was just, I was a week or two into my practice and I hadn't learned all of the visas. And we have an alphabet soup of visas in this country. So somebody called me one day and said, hey, I want to apply for an E3 visa. And I said to them, oh, and I asked 20 questions. And these 20 questions actually made me um, look very stupid, because had I known what the E3 visa was, I would have gone straight to the fact that, are you an Australian citizen? What do you want? I would have asked the right questions.
Of
So
course.
fast forward the clock, the E3 visa is a specific visa that is only available to Australians. And I write about this in my book, but I actually give a story of this. When people in the United States are trying to expand their team members, I often tell them, have a country specific recruitment strategy, because you want to have I have clients who say, I have a mandate to hire 200 people within the next 6 months. That's not an easy mandate. How do you do that? So to those people, I've often said, have a country specific recruitment strategy. And America has treaties with specific countries. And the treaty that America has with Australia allows a particular visa, which is called the E3 visa, that allows Australian citizens to get here relatively quickly. And as long as there is a square peg, square hole,
Mhm.
they can actually get here. And it is a fantastic visa opportunity for those who don't know. You do need to have a degree, and you need a job that requires that degree, and you need an employer who will hire you. Now, if you are a startup founder, you can still get the E3 visa, but it's really, I feel as though I would not do justice to your audience if I didn't tell them that they have a specific visa that will allow them to come to the United States. And if the American dream is your dream, the E3 might be your gateway.
Well, there you go. Well, look, as I mentioned before, Tahmina, this is a global audience, so there will be many other countries that will possibly seek out your attention, your undivided attention, and your assistance. And again, we're going to be sharing your details momentarily. I'm wondering again, do you, when you write, do you see power in the pen, physically picking up a pen, or did you start writing using a keyboard? What was your preference?
I started writing in my head.
Yeah, right.
It's so hard to describe how the writing happened. I never thought of myself as a writer. So I started practicing, with my own firm in 2008-9. And there was a South Asian newspaper that had just opened here. And they contacted me saying, will you please write for us? And I said, I don't write. And the editor was like, no, just write about what you know. I'm like, I don't know what people want to know. So this editor really, I give so much credit to him. And all these years later, if I could find him again and say thank you, I really would. But he basically spoon-fed me the topics he wanted to have for his readership and said, how do you become a citizen? How do you do A and B? And I would just write for him. And it became the beginning of really looking at it. Was a combination of all these stars aligning, where I saw the gap in the law. I had the clients who really wanted their startups. I was writing for this newspaper, and then suddenly I was like, oh, I don't have an editor to tell me what to do, but I know what I need to say about this client and that story and that why that law needs to change. So I became an incessant blogger. I have a blog, and I was writing, like as if I was eating breakfast. I would just write
It's
about
just
in the
natural.
blog that this happened and that happened. And a lot of lawyers would say to me, how do you do it? But I found that if I thought about it too much, then I've lost the time.
Yeah.
I would just do it. So that is how it all started. But the book really came because I had a client who is a venture capitalist in Africa. And he saw me fight for my clients all the time because, as I said, I had an epiphany. I can change the law. And I was writing about it, talking about it, advocating for it, and the law wasn't changing. So he said to me, Tahmina, you have so much material. You should write a book. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how to write a book. Who writes a book?
He writes a book.
You know, and so I just thought to myself, it gave me a false sense of safety that I could write a book, because I thought I've got all of these pieces that I can bring together and put into a book. So I hired somebody as an editor. I also learned a lot about the editing process, what kind of editors you need. And I gave the editor all the links to all my blog posts from all the years I'd been writing. And I sent it to a friend of mine, after it became sort of a manuscript. And my friend said, no, this needs to be two books. One is a guidebook and one is the policy book. Now,
Ah.
this is 2010 or 11 or 12. And I said, no, I am not ready to write a guidebook. I want to change the law. That's how I'm going to die. I'm going to
Ah.
die knowing I changed the law. And I just stuck to that. And very long story short, I eventually got the finished product of the book, and it was a journey. The book eventually looked like a very new product than all the blog posts, because blog posts, as you might know, written at different times, different audiences, different purposes, don't necessarily immediately glue together as one single purpose of a book.
No, no. Yeah.
And it needed a lot of rewriting to such an extent that it became a freshly written book. And I've written, I was saying to a friend of mine, I'm going to send you all my books. I've got 3 books. And I was like, why do I have 5 books in my hands? I said
Ah.
to him, 3 books. And it turns out the first book had a second edition. And that journey was a very different journey in and of itself. The third book that I have was all about the experiences that we talked about, the legal defense fund and so forth. That had a very different experience and journey. And then the guidebook, remember I told you my friend from
Yes.
2012?
Yep.
Eventually, I understood what she said. And she was just the first person of many people who said I really needed to write this guidebook. And eventually, my gut said I needed to do it because the law was not changing.
Mm.
And I'm really driven by what is happening in the law and what's not happening in the law. And so writing did not necessarily come to me easily. I do have an amazing editor. A big shout out to Venice, who is my current editor, and a much love to my late editor, Lornette. She passed away a year ago. She was my fairy god writer, if you
Mm.
like.
Yep.
She taught me everything I know. And so, anybody who's writing, Rick, you're probably speaking to a lot of them. We all have a purpose, a journey, a method, and it's not one size fits all. I'm constantly writing articles in my head. Sometimes they come out on paper or on the computer. Sometimes they don't. I'm currently waiting to hear back on an opinion that I have written about what the next administration can do. I'm
Mm.
currently sitting on a manuscript
It's all
for my first
happening.
book, so just going with the flow and
I love
just.
it. You just have so much going on. And, I have to say, in all of this, you've touched so many people's lives. But I know that you lead with love and you are a humanitarian. And first and foremost, your mission is to help others have a better life. That's essentially what I'm taking away from this. But how does it make you feel when you see people actually doing that and getting a better life? How does it make you feel?
I feel very grateful and blessed that I had the privilege of touching their lives. I think we are all on this earth for a very short amount of time. And when we leave this world, the question is, what have we left behind? And to me, when I touch somebody's life and I see the change that they have been able to bring into their own lives, I know it's not just for them. It's their children, their grandchildren. The ripple effect may not necessarily be visible at that immediate moment to them or to me, but what I do know for a fact that there is a ripple effect, whether they are doing volunteerism, whether they are creating jobs from their businesses, where their children are probably going to be the next president of the United States. The ripple effect is immeasurable, and unquantifiable. So that question you asked me about how does it make me feel, it makes me feel addicted to good and doing more good and making sure that when I leave this world, that people remember me.
Wow, that's profound. I don't know another word for it, but that's very deep, very meaningful, and very authentic and real. And I'm feeling you, and I absolutely love this. And I just cannot say enough how much I've enjoyed this conversation. Now, I know that you're doing so much. I'm surprised you've got enough time to do Tahmina Talks. You have your own podcast. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, well, I have to say that I don't do all of them all at once. Um,
It
I have tried. It doesn't
doesn't work.
necessarily work. Um, I had a live radio show, Rick, and you obviously have the bug. When I did my live radio show, I went into it a little bit nervous and anxious. And I said to my producer, I'm like, I am not a radio show host. What are you talking about? But I got persuaded to do it. And again, the first day I was sucked in. I'm like, I love talking to people. I love making sure that they have knowledge and education. And Tahmina Talks really was a live radio show for 2 years where I would wake up, go to the studio, do my piece, come back and work. Tahmina Talks Immigration was at Tuesday at 10 a.m. every morning. And so when I had those recordings given to me, I really didn't know what to do with them. And the producer said, just put them onto SoundCloud. Do you remember
Oh, yeah,
SoundCloud,
yeah.
Rick?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I don't know if everyone uses it as much anymore, but it was a thing to do.
Yes.
And I put it up there. And that's how Tahmina Talk started. But now it's a podcast, and I now have a podcast studio in my house. So it's much easier for me to figure out where I'm going, what time. I don't have to
Love
dress up and fight traffic. And it's very
it.
efficient. How do you do it, Rick?
Oh,
Do
look,
you?
it's very much a process. I've actually written about it in my own book, but that's another story for another time. But I again, so much to uncover, so much to explore. But the time is flying by, and I'm wondering there will be a lot of people very interested in connecting with you. They're desperate, in fact, to connect with you. Where are they going to do that? Where are they going to find your books and so forth?
Well, thank you so much, Rick, for having me. I actually have two podcasts, Tamina Talks Immigration and The Startup Visa. It was a continuation of the book, so people can subscribe to those on Spotify or Apple. And I'm recording a new season at the moment as we speak, so that will be live in the coming weeks. But they can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm so grateful that you and I connected there. I love connecting to people on LinkedIn. Find me there. My website, my day job or website is www.watsonimmigrationlaw.com. My author website is taminawatson.com. I'm on Instagram, where I share a lot of my bird photography and photos from all my speaking gigs, so to speak. And find me on Facebook,
There are
Twitter.
so
I'm
many.
you can't miss me if you Google.
Yeah. Well, look, Tamina will be making sure that there are links provided to me that we will put in the post. No matter where you see the interview, you're certainly going to find her and all of her wonderful work, all of her wonderful books, and the links to her websites. And with all that being said, Tamina, great call. Thank you so very much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Rick. I'm so grateful.